After over 4 years of playing Genshin Impact, I'm actually surprised that I don't have a single Fischl guide on my channel. If we're making a Mount Rushmore of the most powerful 4-star units in Genshin, mine would of course have Xiangling, Bennett, Xingqiu, and Fischl. Fischl in the 4th spot is very much a debatable opinion, as some would argue characters like Sucrose or maybe even Chevreuse are also really powerful options, but here's why I believe Fischl is such a strong character. The 3 overarching storylines with Fischl's strengths are her powerful Electro application, her free-to-play friendly build options, and her flexible team compositions. But before we dive into the first point about her powerful Electro application, you have to understand the basics of her kit. Using your elemental skill will summon Oz, who automatically targets an enemy within his range to deal consistent electro damage. When you first look at the skill, you'll probably see a 10-second uptime with a 25-second skill cooldown and think that this character is complete garbage. And while that 25-second cooldown can prove to be annoying for certain teams, no, this character is not trash because the skill does pretty decent damage over its duration, and you do have ways to extend the duration of Oz as well. The first way is available to everyone, and that's by using your elemental burst. Fischl's burst will transform her into Oz for 2 seconds and allow her to fly around to deal electro damage to any enemy that she comes into contact with. More importantly, this burst will summon Oz onto the field if he isn't active, or if he is active, the burst will reset the 10-second uptime duration of Oz. This makes it so that Oz can have a theoretical uptime of 20 seconds with a 25-second cooldown, which is much more reasonable. To top things off, part of Fischl's C6 also extends Oz's uptime to 12 seconds, meaning if we multiply that by 2, we get 24 seconds of field time with Oz when spreading out Fischl's skill and burst, which is fantastic for Oz's uptime. Other things you need to know about Fischl's burst is that it has no invincibility frames when you're flying around, and you can swap cancel out of the burst if you don't want to be stuck flying around for the full 2-second duration. And with that, we've pretty much covered the basics of her kit, and now we can take a deep dive into why Fischl's Electro application is so potent. Just looking at Fischl's skill and burst alone, it's not actually a great representation of why Fischl has high Electro application. Sure, Oz attacks pretty fast, but he's only able to apply Electro onto enemies at a rate of once every 4 hits. Where Fischl really separates herself from the rest of the Genshin cast for Electro application is with her Ascension 4 passive. Whenever your active character triggers any Electro reaction, Fischl will smite the closest enemy to your active character with a bolt of lightning that can apply the Electro element, and this only has a 0.5 second cooldown. It's the combination of this Ascension passive from Fischl with the consistent attacks from Oz that allow this duo to outpace almost any other Electro character when it comes to Electro application. And to top it all off, if you've been playing long enough to have Fischl C6, her Electro application gets even better. Previously, we mentioned how C6 increases the duration of Oz's field time, but what this constellation also does is that it allows Oz to fire off coordinated attacks whenever your active character normal attacks. These coordinated attacks help speed up the 4-hit counter for Electro application with Oz, so this constellation is much more than just a personal damage increase for Fischl. And if you really want to get into the specifics, this constellation even helps with Oz's targeting mechanics. Without C6, Oz has some weird calculation called a targeting score that determines who Oz locks onto, and we're not going to waste time to cover such a niche math equation. However, with C6, triggering Oz's coordinated attacks can override this targeting priority and force him to target whichever enemy your active character is damaging, and that's a super useful mechanic to condense your team's DPS onto one enemy. But I digress. Hopefully all the previous explanation about Fischl's Electro application shows that she is a very nuanced character for how simple her kit presents itself to be, and once you understand those nuances, it's clear why she's such a powerful 4-star character. The second point of Fischl's builds being free-to-play friendly mainly concerns her weapon options, but for her potential artifacts, at least we can say that farming gear for Fischl is pretty simple and resin efficient. Her best option by a good margin is the 4-set Golden Troupe, which grants up to 70% skill damage bonus for off-field characters like Fischl. Many players will naturally farm this domain for either this set or the 4-set Marushusei Hunter for some of their Fontaine DPS characters, so you'll have more chances to get something you need from the Golden Troupe domain. If you have yet to farm a full set for Fischl, a 2-set Golden Troupe with the 2-set Thundering Fury is also a very potent option, only falling about 10% behind the DPS of the 4-set Golden Troupe. Other substitute sets that are also around 10 to 15% less DPS than Golden Troupe include the 4-set Gilded Dreams and the 4-set Thundering Fury, depending on whether or not your team composition is set up to fully take advantage of the 4-set effects. For artifact stats, you almost always want to aim for the standard build of attack percent in the Sands, electro damage bonus in the Goblet, and crit in the Circlet. An Elemental Mastery Sands for Aggravate or an Energy Recharge Sands for low energy teams can be viable on Fischl if you already have an extremely large attack buff present on the team, but keep in mind that these are niche scenarios and EM or ER can easily perform worse than an attack percent Sands. Your substat focus is going to be Energy Recharge percent, crit, attack percent, and Elemental Mastery in that order of priority. Energy Recharge is first and foremost because depending on your team and constellation level, Fischl's energy requirements can get quite high. In the worst case scenario where your Fischl is a solo electro character and does not have C6, you may need upwards of 170% energy recharge. With C6's extra coordinated attacks, Oz can generate more energy and thus you can actually deduct around 20% off the original energy requirement, which means the new requirement at C6 is about 150% as a solo electro character. Moving into weapons, the reason why I say Fischl is so free-to-play friendly is not because 5-star weapons aren't good on her, but simply because she has a decent pool of options to choose from. The top weapons for Fischl are all 5-star bows with crit stats such as Polar Star, Hunter's Path, Aqua Simulacra, and Skyward Harp. All of these options have passives many characters can at least get some use out of, and Fischl is no exception. However, I think the majority of players will opt to run a 4-star bow on Fischl because the damage difference between a 5-star and 4-star option isn't as egregious compared to some 5-star characters that have a signature weapon to pull for. The best overall 4-star weapon on Fischl is an R5 Alley Hunter if you're looking for damage. The passive works in a similar fashion to the 4-set Golden Troupe, and the stacking damage percent from the passive is useful both in Dendro and non-Dendro teams. Other options that can at least get very close to the damage output of the Alley Hunter include the Stringless, Range Gauge, Song of Stillness, and Chainbreaker. All of these options have at least somewhat comparable damage depending on the team, but let's start our conversation with Range Gauge and Song of Stillness first. Both of these weapons have passives that require Fischl to be healed before she summons Oz in order for Oz to benefit from their passive buffs, which means the practical damage performance from these weapons can be much worse compared to the theoretical performance if you do not set up your buffs correctly. On the other hand, Chainbreaker and the Stringless are much easier to get full value out of. While Chainbreaker definitely has the lowest damage ceiling out of these 4 bows that we're currently talking about, it is a craftable that you can opt for over the finicky Song of Stillness whenever you use diverse element teams such as Hyperbloom. As for the Stringless, it does perform the best in Dendro teams because of the EM main stat instead of the normal attack percent stat, but thanks to its unconditional elemental skill damage bonus on its passive, it still does great damage in other teams as well. The final options that you should resort to for Fischl's personal damage are the Viridescent Hunt from the Battle Pass if you're struggling with crit stats, or the old event bow Fading Twilight if you need a healthy balance between energy recharge and damage. Bows like Favonius Bow and Elegy of the End are also extremely potent on Fischl if you're content with lowering her personal damage in exchange for providing some energy utility or buffs to the team. And last but not least, we've reached the team building section. Just like the other 3 staple 4-star characters of Xiangling, Bennett, and Xingqiu, it shouldn't surprise you that Fischl is extremely flexible in teams, even more so than most 5-star characters. With that being said, I'm not going to sit here for another 30 minutes and lay out every single possible team that you can play with Fischl. Instead, I want to cover just a few unique team compositions that utilize either a special property of Fischl or an interesting combination of reactions that end up benefiting the team. If there is a team archetype that I haven't listed today, I assure you it's not a bad archetype, and I actually encourage you to test out different teams with Fischl with how much value that she can add to any team that she's on. Now, the first team we're going to touch base on today not only utilizes a unique interaction from Fischl and Oz, but also is one of the strongest team archetypes to this day. Hyperbloom is an archetype that is normally run with Kuki or Raiden Shogun as your Hyperbloom triggers, but with the addition of Fischl, you can also use an Anemo character with high elemental mastery to trigger the Hyperbloom reaction instead. This is because Oz will always prioritize targeting enemies over Dendro cores, allowing your Anemo characters to swirl Electro and deal high Hyperbloom damage if they're already building full EM for the benefits from their own kits. Fischl's Ascension 4 talent has a very small AoE and can steal Hyperbloom triggers on occasion, but overall this is a great team that ensures most of your Hyperblooms are getting their damage calculated from your full EM character, as opposed to a character with little to no elemental mastery. As for how the team is composed, you have Fischl, your Hyperbloom trigger, and your Hydro and Dendro applicators in the final 2 slots. The most common Hyperbloom triggers for this team are either Sucrose or Kazuha because their kits highly incentivize building full elemental mastery already, but another 4-star Anemo option you can choose is Heijo. Since you're more likely than not on-fielding your Anemo character, your best Hydro applicator options are off-field. That brings us to the usual staples of the meta, which include Xingqiu, Yelan, Farina, or Kokomi. With that same reasoning, your off-field Dendro options often include Dendro MC, Nahida, Yao Yao, or Kole. However, for those playing Kazuha, he's more of a quick swap / off-field unit, and if you'd like to run an on-field Dendro or Hydro carry instead, feel free to do so. The second unique team with Fischl is what many like to call an Overvape team, which is the combination of Overload and Vaporize. Essentially, when the enemy is afflicted with Electrocharged, the Hydro and Electro element briefly exist on the enemy at the same time. Once we apply Pyro to that enemy, we can simultaneously trigger, Overload, and Vaporize, hence the team archetype name. Some of the reasons why Fischl is so powerful in this team is because of her unique way of applying Electro, and because she's one of the few Electro characters that deals both a lot of damage and isn't reliant on the Electro resonance for energy. The most common way to structure these teams is around a Pyro main DPS such as Arlenkino, Hu Tao, or Yoimiya. The Hydro applicator is almost always Xingqiu or Yelan since you need a high rate of Hydro application, but for characters with slower Pyro application like Yoimiya, you can get away with other options like Farina. In the final slot, the most common options are still Bennett and Zhongli because they are the common supports to Pyro carries with extremely useful utility, but there are other variations to this archetype as well that don't require supporting a Pyro DPS. The first special case of Overvape is called a Sunfire team. Although this sub-archetype has fallen out of popularity over the years, it is a very interesting team that utilizes the special Pyro swirl that occurs when playing Jean's Burst and Bennett's Burst on top of each other. All you need to finish this team off is Fischl and then a melee Hydro carry like Ayato or Child, and it pretty much functions like any other Overvape team. The second special case team is Fischl, Kokomi, Xiangling, and Sucrose, commonly dubbed as Sukokomon by many older players. This team uses a special interaction between Guoba and Sucrose to swirl Pyro, and it pretty much achieves that same reaction soup as Sunfire, but this time much more instantaneously. Although the guide is pretty old, I do have a full 12-minute guide on the Sukokomon team on my channel that you can go check out since it's way too complicated of a team for me to explain here. But before you go to that video, we do have one more team archetype to briefly mention. Aggravate is not really a special team archetype by any means, but I do want to quickly talk about it before we end the video. The reason why this archetype deserves a mention is because classic Aggravate teams are now so much easier to build compared to when Dendro first released in patch 3.0. Nowadays, we have Dendro healers and shielders that can apply Dendro off-field, allowing for your final slot to be an Anemo buffer like Kazuha or Sucrose instead of a healer like Jean or Sayu. And to make things even better, other new options like Shilonen and Farina are also very flexible buffers that can even be slotted into Aggravate teams and change the standard setup of 2 Electro characters, 1 Dendro character, and 1 Anemo character. If you have any of these options, feel free to experiment with different variations of Aggravate for your favorite Electro carry. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this Fischl guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Fischl for your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.